Welcome, welcome as more readers trickle in. Oh, of course, Leslie from my dear Philadelphia, how I miss it always. Other folks from Washington, Port Townsend, is that close to Spokane, Maya? I don't know anything about geography of, well, that's a broad statement, not nothing. 7 hours. Washington's a big state. This country is just large in general in terms of size. Lots of folks from Washington coming in. We'll give it a few more minutes. And the question I had asked is to put in the chat, what haunts you? Something that haunts. Oh, post-grad, that is very haunting. Education. As an educator, I am still haunted by much of my previous education and current as I continue to be educated. I'm going to see if I can share us live to Facebook. And then we will get started. Fabulous. And we are going live on Facebook. So you may feel free to go on Facebook and share with others that the meeting is streaming live, but it's also going to be recorded and then posted on YouTube. So there'll be many places where you can check it out. Great to see some Denison students here joining us from Granville, Ohio, Dick in Southwest Ohio. So good to see you all. I'm going to give it about 1 more minute so we start, for poets, pretty on time, 5 minutes after the start time. But I think Zoom has made us all a bit more punctual, don't you think? Readings, I think, used to start like 30 minutes late. But now that Zoom makes us start close to start time, maybe in-person readings are more on time too. All right, friends. Well, I'm going to keep an eye on our waiting room, but I'm also going to get us started. I am so grateful to all of you for being here today for the second Words Together, Worlds Apart event that is generously sponsored by Denison University. Our haunting and luminary readers today are Jared Harel, Jessica Q. Stark, Rajiv Mohabir, and Maya Jewell Zeller. Before we get to the main event, be on the lookout already for the next reading, which is next year. That's scary to say, but it's on January 24th, 2024, and it's going to be on the theme of family with Oliver de la Paz, Ananda Lima, Irene Mathieu, and Chen Chen. And I will put the link for that reading into the chat for you. So if you're gung-ho to register for it right now, just register right now, then you won't forget to attend. And if you have a book coming out or would like to be considered as a featured reader in the future, don't hesitate to reach out to me at the following contact information that I've put in the chat, and follow the reading series on Facebook and Twitter. And it doesn't have an Instagram, but you know, there's always more room for social media. And now for the main event. The verb haunt comes from Old French haunter, to frequent, to visit regularly, to have to do with, be familiar with, indulge in, cultivate. But it also has a fascinating origin, perhaps from Old Norse, hemita, to bring home, or Germanic, home. Thus, the idea of haunting is a kind of return. And it brings us to Freud's notion of the unheimlich, or the uncanny, which is a literal translation of unhomely. So something that is so close to us, so close to home, but just different enough to be uncanny, to haunt. So your prompt, if you choose to accept it, is to take a word, a place, a thing, a memory, a relationship, and then unhome it. To write it first with proximity, and then to show the way it haunts, the way it is uncanny, close to home, but just different enough to unsettle and haunt. And as is the tradition of the host starting with a poem, I really wasn't sure what to start with until I wrote the prompt for y'all. And then I was taken back to this really strange poem I wrote about Freud, having read the Uncanny Essay, and then going back and reading the Sandman story, the fairy tale by E.T.A. Hoffman that the story was, or that the essay is based off on, which is this really scary story because the Sandman like eats children's eyes. It's a lot creepier than you might think. So this is Freud Dreams of Sandman with an epigraph from E.T.A. Hoffman's The Sandman. Now we have eyes enough. Cut off my ears. I'm left stone on water, an echo brim of bees. Cut out my tongue. Louder, I'll say, unsilenced, wolf against a snow moon's howling, howling out of stomach's pit, a pith where nothing feeds and nothing grows. Take it, my tongue, hold the whole of it, teethed and toothless, and I'll follow the way of the ground, her taste for contrast, the seasons, like a plague soaked down, stronger, stronger still, unmouthed, cut off my nose. I swear to make the wind listen, wind on water like a swarm of wasps, listen, inhale it full, cut off, just do it, my fingers. I won't lose feeling, one by one, my knuckles know to swim through sand. It's desert current taking hold. And last, hurry, you've stalled it long enough. Cut out my eyes, and in their place, watch me. I'll grow wings, watch the feathered flight rise. Find me hiding in your crescent moon rock, blind and starving, claim me. Father of the fatherless, beak held open, feed me what's inside your birdlessness. I'll wait for it, swallow dreaming from your lips, this white-eyed, endless sleep. It's a creepy little poem. And now our marvelous, haunting featured readers. And I told them the order we were reading in, and then I didn't check that they put the bios in that order. So who did I say was reading first? Who did I tell you was reading first? Jared, that's what I thought. Jared is the author of the brand new Let Our Bodies Change the Subject, which was selected by Kwame Dawes as the winner of the 2022 Raz Shoemaker Prairie Schooner Book Prize in Poetry, and just came out from University of Nebraska Press. He has been awarded the Stanley Kunitz Memorial Prize from the American Poetry Review, as well as the William Matthews Poetry Prize from the Asheville Review. He teaches writing, plays drums, and lives in Westchester, New York with his wife and 2 kids. I will put the link to his website and to purchasing the book because you want this book in the chat, and invite Jared to haunt us.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much, Julia. Can everybody hear me all right? Great. So yeah, it's really a pleasure to be here with you all and to read in this amazing lineup. I'm going to read some poems from my new collection, Let Our Bodies Change the Subject, which came out a couple months ago from University of Nebraska Press. It's a collection that's kind of knee-deep in parenthood. I have 2 small children, a 10-year-old girl and a 8-year-old son. And so it's a book about parenthood, about love and loss, about kind of living for joy while also being haunted by the past and a little bit terrified for the future, and how to raise children in a world like that. So the first poem I'm going to read is actually the opening poem in the collection. It took place kind of over a summer. Uh, the whole collection was written in Queens, New York. And this one goes to Queens Zoo, it goes to Coney Island, this first poem. And it was written over the course of a summer in which my daughter, kind of question by incisive question, came to understand death in her own way. It's called Sad Roller Coaster. My daughter is in the kitchen working out death. She wants to get it, how it tastes and feels. Her teacher talks like it's some glittery gold sticker. Her classmates hear rumors, launch it as a curse when toys aren't shared. Between bites of cantaloupe, she considers what she knows. Her friend's grandpa lives only in her iPad. Dr. Seuss passed, but keeps speaking in rhyme. We go to Queens Zoo and spot the beakish skull of a white-tailed deer tucked between rocks in the puma's enclosure. It's just for show, I explain, explaining nothing. That night, and the one after, my daughter dreams of bones, how they lift out of her skin and try on her dresses. So silly, she laughs, when I ask if she's okay. Then, toward the back end of summer, we head to Coney Island to catch a Cyclones game. We buy popcorn and fries. A pop fly arcs over checkerboard grass. When past the warning track, the park wall, she sees a giant wooden spine. This brownish red maze traced in decay. She calls it Sad Roller Coaster, then begs to be taken home. So like I said, the collection was written in Queens, New York, but this next one was from a road trip where we went a bit north to upstate. And I think it's kind of a spooky poem. It's a sonnet. It's called Good Star. I swear we hadn't seen a good star in years. Just mild brightenings in a skyline sky, or neon decals on our kids' bedtime ceiling, until finally we decided to drive upstate and park beneath a dome of wild darkness. The baby stayed asleep, a galaxy all his own, while you sang Blackbird upon the curved hood, and our daughter blinked up from the edge of the field, head back as if rinsing out shampoo. The night was cold. Her spangly sneakers went black and still, and suddenly I knew that if we did not reach her, something would. Hushed and hidden, yet I failed to speak. Then God, how I raced to face my reward. So like I said, one of the themes of the collection is sort of dealing with the hauntings of the past and the future. And once upon a time, I wrote this poem called On Suffering. And it was based on a poem by the great Polish poet Wisława Szymborska, who had written a poem called On Death Without Exaggeration. And in the poem, as she does, she has this dry wit and uses lots of personification and has all these examples. And so I tried using dry wit and personification and using lots of examples. And the poem was getting fairly long. And at some point I wrote the line, "To be clear, I'm no expert." Because I was writing this poem and I kept thinking, I'm like, what do I know about suffering? What do I actually know? And my grandparents are Holocaust survivors. And so they were also sort of in the background. And I was thinking, well, what do I know compared to this? And so now I have this what I wound up doing is I wrote that line and it was the first line that felt true. And so I deleted everything that preceded it. And I started the poem with that line. And so now I have a really short poem called On Suffering. To be clear, I'm no expert. I know only that suffering simmers in every heart, singes in plain sight like an electric stove. And though my grandfather told me over and over, I don't know how he made it through bone and mud in some shithole Polish village in 1941, or how he lost everything brutally and kept shuffling into light. I will read, I'll read two more poems for you. And then excited to hear everybody else read. So a couple years ago, my older brother thought it would be a super smart idea to play full court basketball with a bunch of college students in low top Converse. um, and so he wound up tearing his Achilles tendon. And we lived a couple blocks away from each other. And so I wound up going and visiting him like every day and just kind of keeping him company because he kind of had to sit on the couch for like 2 months. And so while doing this, I wound up looking up and researching like Achilles tears. And I wound up having this fear, like every time I like did anything, I was like, did I just tear my Achilles? So this kind of haunted me as well. But I also, in the process of all that, wound up looking up the Achilles myth and kind of reading about that as well. And so both of these make their way into this next poem, which is called Achilles. And I also reference NBA 2K, which those of you who don't know is a video game. Achilles. My brother came down with a defensive rebound and a body prized and trained against time, much like Achilles believed he was invincible until Paris's arrow torpedoed his heel. Who plunges into battle without proper footwear? Nearly 40, my brother wore low tops, heard the hard pop of tendon as he fell. Here on the sofa, his left leg elevated beside prescription painkillers and a bottle of blue Gatorade, I strain to stay casual, keep things upbeat. I say, did you hear there's one blockbuster left in America? Or Achilles actually died of his wound, so by most accounts, you're doing really well. When that fails to take, I challenge my brother in NBA 2K. We orchestrate fadeaways, no-look alley-oops, pixels so intuitive it feels almost true. But the truth is, I don't know what to do for him. When his best friend Patroclus was killed in battle, Achilles came out of retirement to avenge his death, slaughtered Hector, then dragged his corpse across Troy. I buy my brother crosswords and sour gummy worms, sit through whatever movie he wants to see, as we nurse an ache, both sudden and ancient. These bodies that hold us, this watching them go. And thanks so much for listening. I'm going to read one more. It's the title poem from my collection. And so I guess one of the things that very much haunts me as a parent of two school-age children is the number of mass shootings in this country. This was written after a mass shooting. I don't actually even remember which one, which I guess says something about the state of our country in that sense. But it owes a lot to a conversation I had with my wife the evening after. And it's called Let Our Bodies Change the Subject. Thanks for listening. In the kitchen, with the kids finally asleep and news of another shooting in the space between us, you confess you think death might feel like giving birth, the body insistent, having its way. You say you'd never been so at the mercy of yourself as you were on that bed in that cloud-thin gown, and just the knowing it was coming, ruthless transformation. I have no good response to ruthless transformation, and so it hangs there above a bowl of tortilla chips and black bean salsa we've decided will be dinner. It lingers while a reporter frames chaos as developments, her shoulders rinsed in darkness and revolving red lights. I want to kiss you, build asylum inside you. Let our bodies change the subject, the channel to cartoons. Before night pulls away down the flickering interstate, I want one ruined thing utterly redeemed, a death toll rescinded, a swastika removed, my uncle's melanoma caught early enough to cut, a beige Band-Aid halfway down his calf. It had looked, my aunt said, like little more than an ink spot. I didn't get nervous till it didn't wash out. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for that powerful, powerful reading, Jared. What a way to start, to begin to haunt. Next, we have Jessica Q. Stark, who is the author of Buffalo Girl, out this year from BOA Editions, a finalist for the 2023 Maya Angelou Book Prize. She's also the author of Savage Pageant from Birds LLC in 2020. And her 4 poetry chapbooks include Inanet. See, I should have checked on the pronunciation of these things. Her poems have been published widely, including Best American Poetry and Pleiades. She is the poetry editor of a magazine I'm sure you all know, Agni, and an assistant professor of creative writing at the University of North Florida. She co-organizes the Dreamboat reading series in Jacksonville, Florida, and I will post for you the ways to buy all of her books. They are incredible. You should absolutely buy them. Jessica.
Hey, you hear me okay? Cool. I'm just gonna read one poem from my first book, Savage Pageant. I don't know if you all do this, other poets in the crowd, but sometimes I feel like I pinpoint one poem as like the microcosm of the whole book sometimes, and it changes all the time. And this is the one I feel is the microcosm of this book, and I feel like it's a good invocation in terms of the theme of haunting. I also have a little cold, so bear with me. It's kind of a haunted version of my voice too. It's called The Dead Letter Office. And that references in the US Postal Service, there's what's called the Dead Letter Office, which is usually housed physically underground. And it's where, you know, letters or packages that the addresses are indecipherable. It's where they kind of go to live, where they can't be arrived. And what better metaphor for the messy stakes of US American history than the Dead Letter Office. We make an effort for some, a shaky script, a single digit slip of zip code, but most times they're dead on arrival. Enclosed items of value are carefully removed. Correspondence is destroyed to protect customer privacy. Items that cannot be returned are sold at auction, except for firearms and porn. Perhaps one day you will know what it's like to sit beside the Dead Letter Office, a stunted hall of the pending and untraceable plot. Listen to this value, stranger. It is the most important thing to know. Even the dead need to be touched with hands, some human, some not. Depending on where you stand, you might become a window. But first, to enter this domain, you need a letter. For our trouble, a stamp. And a shadow between rows will be growing, like a blade of grass pressed flat between pages of a book that was miscounted in the vault's holding. So that's that one. I'm just gonna read a couple of poems from Buffalo Girl out in April. This one is largely about my mother who immigrated here in 1975. And she unfortunately just passed away this recent June. So this is a book that's quite close to my heart in a lot of ways. I'm gonna read one called New World Ghost Story, which references when my mom first came and immigrated with her large family to Southern California as immigrants, as refugees, and how somewhat inhospitable that locale was to refugees at the time. New World Ghost Story. Here lies the house that she traded for blood, that the siblings still fight over, the domicile that repels division. Of course, it would be filled with white ghosts inside and white ghosts outside, calling about the white fence around the way of telling you this is about the time Ungwai laughed in the face of a ghost that pressed nightly on his chest. He was so full up of it. Terror repeated long enough becomes pure comedy. And what else can you do but laugh and laugh about the time the nuns on bicycles shouted slurs against the new neighbors taking? or the time that I wandered into the backyard and finally knew a dead thing, or how Ungwai, out of nostalgia and spite, snapped the neck of the chicken he kept right there on the front lawn for our supper without pause, luck unraveling in his raspy hands. On the sidewalk, a pair of mistaken ghosts mounted their bloodied bicycles, mouthed, "Oh, oh, oh," and fled. And the last one I'll read from this book is the titular poem, Buffalo Girl. It's the one I dedicate to my mother and her memory, who haunts me every day. It also references Chu Thi Trinh, who was a Vietnamese warrior in ancient Vietnamese history who resisted invasion of the Han Dynasty. Buffalo Girl. History makes little bundles out of the unthinkable. Young boys carve 3-foot breasts to keep your story otherworldly and ridiculous. A crisp blade slips from view. We stand at the Albertsons customer service, and I hold my breath as you ready a well-worn trap. Discount oversight. Grave mistake. A set of eyes exhaust, and I almost feel for our opposing force, who does not know the survival of ants under glass. Long after your death, you haunted soldiers' dreams. The Chinese commander that slayed you built fallacies to try to keep you still. Poor men and their fantasies of time and blood that pass only during the duration of war. Victory painted the parking lot lucky red. Every shield arm in your eyes. History books are forever. Missing the details of unfathomable loss, providing discounts on overstocked goods. You are my mother, minor warrior, who has never needed saving, who has never needed memory to make a home, a good home, alone in the woods. All right, I got some new rough stuff for y'all, so strap on in. It's from a new project called Antoinette. It's about a lot of things. Unavoidably, it is a lot about grief and the passing of my mother, but prior to that, before it became wrapped up in that, I was doing a lot of research on Marie Antoinette and the figure of Marie Antoinette, more so like the ideas of Marie Antoinette, the permutations of her in popular culture and Hollywood, and how strange that was, and thinking about the sonic slippage between Antoinette and the word internet. And this stems from this chapbook I've been writing for 8 years called Internet, and just thinking about the permutations of ourselves on the internet. So all to say, I'm still working through it, but this comes from that manuscript, which is quite a different beast than my others. I'm gonna read a poem, and then I've been doing a series of self-erasures of my own poems. So I'll read the poem and then I'll read the self-erasure, and I just have about 3 more. This one's called The Head of Antoinette, and it comes with an epigraph from her biography. Every account, every eyewitness agreed on the unassailable composure with which Marie Antoinette went to her death. And that's the biography from Antonia Fraser. The Head of Antoinette. And after the internet declared memorial, I walked around in a luckless haze, buying seltzers on discount at CVS, attending to the vines poised at the peripheral of these brief houses. The cut of grief's tenure embeds in the details of this monotony, in the verticality it all requires. Victoria Chang said, "To acknowledge death is to acknowledge we must take another shape. which is very smart, but does not resemble the cloudless sky beneath my fingernails, nor the impractical dignity one needs to conclude. When you died, I felt not another shape, but the first bite of my formlessness in my imaginary edge, that I felt you everywhere, not like a salve, but like slippage. That the corporeal projects a naive fiction that binds us to a fear of fearing, which is, I suppose, what makes us human. I'm not sure you know that the internet began much earlier in the 1960s so that government researchers could share information, though computer networks wouldn't be able to communicate with each other until 1983. What was born then was a universal language, a bodiless medium for sharing photos of human organs and other news. Why am I always finding valuable items in parking lots, beside elevators, in carriages, in customs, in combustible tunnels under tow? After I died, I uploaded every piece of me into the veil and walked out like fading temperature. Headless, I hope to more fully know your story that escapes the limitations of my skull, or perhaps overlook the scaffold around your bright end. Or maybe, without my head, I might better lose the string of the story altogether, so that I might reach straight through these wires to touch once more your face. The Head of Antoinette, self-erasure. I walked in grief's tenure, embedded in the details of fear. Human networks communicate every piece of your story. Their limitations scaffold your bright touch. All right, are we doing okay out there? I didn't bring the happy stuff this evening. In this manuscript, there's just this other kind of, haunting, this feeling haunted by the internet. I feel haunted by the internet. I feel haunted by money. I feel haunted by work, what it feels like to be haunted by information. And this next one kind of speaks to that a little bit. It's called Pandora's Box. And thinking about, the internet as this thing where we've opened it and we can't really put it all back where we found it. And what inspired it was that kind of recent news bit that was like, that guy like went on under oath to say that like, aliens existed, and then like everybody went to work. Everyone like still went to work the next day. Anyways, that's the inspiration. It's called Pandora's Box. It's no surprise that our lot didn't bat an eye at the earnest testimony of extraterrestrials among us. We've become so used to the absurd and crushing weight of spectacular news over papers, over coffee, over papers, and after I take out the dog, no, I witness the cat. No, I forge the animal nature of my soft heart onto this palate to eat what is still raw on my plate. I am not interested in what you have to say, baby, not interested in your live stream. I am trying to break out of this piss palace, but all I can do is scroll the meaty corpus of my grief to keep it suspended, to keep it like my mistreated houseplant, like my heedless worship of the classroom, alive and hung like the most banal library poster-loving latchkey child, luckless, waiting out lunch in the bathroom stall. Stall me out again, like take me with you to the stars, baby. Take me to your fat alien love, somewhere vast, somewhere wetter. Maybe some inky planet where they still tend to the plants that will outlive them, where their kind might both caress the box and let it be. Alrighty, do I have time for one more, or should I close out? Okay, one more. This one's called Chanticleer. Thank you for listening. Chanticleer. That day we lifted complicated machinery as easy as a knife and left a little organ on a window's mantle. Bamboo wallpaper framed a heat wave as heavy as probability. Your hand cooled against gray steel, though I could not muster to bear its tactile disappearance. I am only as strong as disaffection, darling. It is the tragic flaw of my doom, my generation of holy voids among the corporate living. Like a vine, I cannot bear the cliches of my cleaving. There is a myth I have been searching for years. One about a rooster with a slit throat that continues. It reminds me of the medical system and writing anything after your death. Of tenderness shot through that downs memory like my plane I envision plummeting mercifully through the sky. No, let this have another end. Love laid across me like a dead sleep. I don't know the last words you meant to say to me, but I still thought them into a poem. Thanks.
Thank you so much. How heartbreaking and beautiful. Thank you so much, Jessica. We will be haunted by those poems. And now our third reader, poet, memoirist, and translator, Rajiv Mohabir, is the author of 4 books of poetry, including Cuttlefish, out from, oh, I'm sorry, I said Cuttlefish. That's not at all what I meant. I think it's because I saw the whale behind you, and then that's where my mind went. Cutlish, out from 4-Way Books in 2021, which was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award and a recipient of the Eric Hoffer Medal Provocateur. His poetry and nonfiction have been finalists for the 2022 PEN America Open Book Award and the Lambda Literary Award in poetry and in nonfiction, the Randy Slitz Award for gay nonfiction, and both second place finalists for the Guyana Prize for Literature in 2022. His translations have won the Harold Morton Landon Translation Award from the Academy of American Poets in 2020. Whale Aria from 4-Way Books out this year. And you can buy it. I will give you the links. He is currently assistant professor of poetry at the University of Colorado, Boulder. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Julia, for inviting me to come and to, Jared and Jessica, how incredible to hear your poetry. And Maya, I'm so excited to hear yours as well. And so I teach a class on poetic haunting, so I'm gonna try to not be too didactic right now. But like when I think about hauntings, I think of them as being historical, which is also like temporal, kind of in this like broadened sense. They're rhetorical, and devices that we as poets can use, like, grammatical devices, sound devices, repetition, with change. I also think that they're arranged textually, and when it comes to ordering the poetry manuscript, you can really bring out this idea of a hauntedness that comes out here. And then, the last thing I'll say about hauntings is that they're queer, in that they queer time, they queer the idea of text, they queer the idea of sound, and haunting happens in slippage between our world and the next. And so I'm going to read poems from Whale Aria. And behind me, you'll see a humpback whale, and then these are some California sea lions, and that's another humpback whale right there. And this was a picture that was taken, that I took off the coast of Santa Barbara in California. So this book is haunted by a number of things. One of which is my own personal and familial migration story. My parents are from Guyana, South America, but we are ethnically Indian from India who have survived. We are the descendants of the survivors of indentured labor. And so this first poem speaks to this haunting of this kind of empire's engine, which is fueled by racism. And when I say empire, yes, I mean Britain. I also mean the United States, be it in the neoliberal arm that is stretching into Guyana now as it has its oil, as well as the funding of wars across the world, including in Philistine. This is called Dominion, and it begins with the epigraph. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. Genesis 1:26. Let there be light skins and dark skins, one to rule the other. A mandrake quickens into greed grab, tears a page from Genesis. Clods of earth are clods of God. Clods of earth are clods of dendrites with dirt skirting the roots. Memory of the untouched is the more beautiful object. From the streets, gashed bodies lament this justice. Burn-scarred lives owned by light. I strike a candle against ruin, against the separation of day and night. So a lot of the things that happen for me in haunting also include astonishment. The kind of bewilderment and wonder of what it means to be alive and to not be able to understand with a one-to-one correlation the things that happened and the places that we are going to go. And one of those like brilliances and terrifying things is the fact of the golden record, which was a record sent into space that includes so many different languages and sound, including humpback whale song. And so this is a poem called Golden Record. I grew up in Central Florida, and we spent a lot of time in the ocean, my family and I, going back to the sea. So I think that's all you really need to know here. In the Gulf, I am shadow, upside down, singing to the coral. The water teems with copepods and echoes. I fear the night terror of oil rig drills, blast holes hollowing my ribs where folk songs flourished. Of the erased, scientists raise dioramas and copies in resin. A pale record of 55 languages orbits from the space station, and on that plate, whale song. From the gold disc, a copy, a woman's voice asks in Hindi, Jat kahan ho akeli? Where do you go alone? I still perch on the cantering night horse. My colony body crumbles into fossil. Even at home in Boston, no one understands what I ask for when I say bira. It has two definitions in English. One, warrior, the other, loneliness. The next poem I'm going to read is called Oral History, and it's written in the form of a chutney poem. So you'll hear a verse in Caribbean Hindi or Guyanese Bhojpuri that is functionally extinct. But my grandparents were the last speakers in my family, and so I was able to learn as much as I could. And at the very end, in a kind of semantic haunting, is a translation that you will hear, but you're not going to hear it right away. So maybe there's like a deferral of understanding. Oral history. Isa bole, ungri ya rakhle, hatan ki dekh ke hamar kissa maan le. Marine biologists read rorqual keratin as diaries. Just like tree rings, baleen records mysteries of diet and thalassic migration, the pox of drought and plenty. Continent side, I've grown osteocytes of oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, frayed on stories of survival. The days Ma could afford chicken for curry. The weeks we ate bare saltines. Hunger bored into Obad, carved lyrics into our bristles. Want naturalized its holes in trabecular serenade. Dark, hard, worn. Do we belong yet, abraded as America? Jesus said, put your finger here. Look at my hands and believe. I have two more poems for you this evening. I am thinking about, a lot of things, and one of the hauntings can be, like I said, historical. And so this is based on a historical fact, and it also is keeping in that form of the chutney poem, so meaning deferred until the end. And this is called Vestigial Bones. John se tu bhagela I thoke nigalai. Je andar rahe uhi tohar jahaj nast kari. The remnant of hind limbs, puppets, and origin play that strings baleen to terrestrial ancestors. Occasionally, whales sport hind limbs, as in Vancouver. In 1949, a harpooned humpback bore 18 inches of femur, breaching its body wall. Disconnected from the spine, what is their function but to rend the book of Genesis into two? Why regard scripture and exegesis as legs and fluke, sure to fall away? Why not eat beef and pork? Why do I need Hindi in Hawaii as a skeletal structure, a myth to hook my Leviathan jaw? What you run from will swallow you. What's inside will splinter your boat. The last poem that I'm going to read for you is called Why Whales Are Back in New York City. So, like you've heard, I've told you basically in this reading, I've lived in Central Florida, I've lived in Hawaii, I've lived in Boston, I've also lived in New York. I spent probably almost a decade in the city. And big up to Queens. I lived in Jackson Heights. So Jared, yeah. And so when I left New York for Hawaii, the humpback whales had started to return to the city, which is like, after so long, so incredible and wonderful. In 2016, also, there was a scare of people having their naturalization papers questioned, and people being returned back to their countries of origin. When my family came to the United States, we came without the correct papers. And so one of the communities that was hit the hardest was that of the Indo-Caribbeans who live in South Queens. And this is called Why Whales Are Back in New York City. After a century, humpbacks migrate again to Queens. They left due to sewage and white froth banking the shores from polychlorinated biphenyl dumping into the Hudson and winnowing Menhaden schools. But now, grace. Bodies of song return. Go to the seaside, hold your breath, submerge. A black fluke silhouettes the Manhattan skyline. Now, ICE beats doors down on Liberty Avenue to deport. I sit alone on orange A-train seats, mouth sparkling from Singh's roti shop. No matter how white supremacy gathers at the sidewalks, flows down the streets, we still beat our drums wild. Watch their false god statues prostrate to black and brown hands. They won't keep us out, though they send us back. Our songs will pierce the dark fathoms. Behold the miracle. What was once lost now leaps before you. Thank you. Thank you all so much for your attention.
Thank you so much. What a haunting return in that final poem. And I think I speak for all of us that we want to take your class. So maybe there can be a little haunting online component. I don't know. It sounds fascinating. And our last, but certainly not least reader, I must give a haunting story because I know each of our readers personally, but though I know them in person, like we've met in life and all this stuff, not just on the Zoom. But I met Maya first, even before I got my MFA, as a young little poet Googling like, ooh, what poems should I know? And Maya's poem had won the Crab Orchard Review Prize way back when. And I read it and I died a little inside because I thought I could never write like this. It's so amazing. And then young poet me reached out to Maya, said, I loved your poem. I'm applying to grad school. Can we talk? So the young poets in the room, I know that some of my students are here. You can do this. And some poets might even respond like Maya and have a correspondence ever since, and then finally meet more than a decade later at AWP in Portland. Sorry for the preamble, but that felt like a haunting. Like this is a haunting return because relationships haunt as well in the way that Rajiv, you started us off with. So Maya Jewell Zeller just released Outtakes Glove Box, chosen by Eduardo Harel as the winner of the New American Poetry Prize, and has been lauded by Diane Seuss as, quote, the kind of deft performance only a mermaid or a mother could pull off, and I agree. Maya's writing guide, Advanced Poetry, comes out from Bloomsbury in January 2024. She teaches for Central Washington University's MA and BA programs in professional and creative writing, as well as the low residency MFA at Western Colorado University. She lives in the Inland Northwest with her children, and I will give you links to purchase her book. And welcome, Maya.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you for that beautiful story. I love that story so much. And I love our correspondence over the years and the way that we've continued to write to one another. We've been epistolary friends for, as Julia said, probably like 15 years. I think it was 3 schools ago. I was teaching at a different institution. So thank you for that. And I loved those poems so much, Jared and Rajiv and Jessica. Those were just absolutely gorgeous. And I'm haunted and can't wait to, I'm just getting to know Jared's work. So I'll be ordering books after this. So thank you. I wanted to also thank Julia for giving a prompt. I think it's gorgeous to offer us something to write from. I made some slides to go with this reading, and I know that we don't all have access to them because we don't have a screen share, but what I'm doing is I just put a link into the chat and made them public. So if you want to follow along with the beginning poems, you can follow along on Google Docs, and that makes it accessible in some ways. And then I'm not going to read exclusively from those slides, so I'll tell you when I'm hopping off of them. So if you'd like to follow along, I'll just give people a moment to click the link. If you want to, no pressure, you can just listen to me. So I have my book, Outtakes Glove Box here, and I'm going to start. The book is kind of haunted by reproductive systems, rights and not rights to reproductive health, monstrosity, motherhood, and mermaids. And I'm going to begin with a poem that kind of centers around the image of my father's tow truck pulling My father used to drive a tow truck, and he would pull old cars into bushes. And I would pull out of those old cars. I would harvest my first cassette tapes, some clothing. A lot of my life began in scavenger state. And so the central image of the book is a documentary film that's kind of being pulled out of a glove box that's opening with dirt spilling out, and a reel of film. So the first poem that I'm going to read is called Documentary. It's on the second slide if you'd like to follow along. Documentary. On the screen, my brain's bright jewelry, arranged in a love scene. My mother, my used little ovaries, this dark box, the roads I drove. I am making a city of petals, of rhododendrons, places I can arrive. I drove here on the roads of my brain, the gray streets, the creases of my mother. I drove here in this old car with its rusted axle and its peeling steering wheel and its glove box full of dirt. Around me, chestnuts fall from their mothers, from their dark driving forces. In the field where I have arrived, I close the horse we opened together. I close its flayed stomach, hinged and winged like moths, its wet little eggs still bobbing in their soft ponds. My equine anatomy, my horse mother, my four-footed beast. I ride her back home. And then from there, the first section of the book moves into a series of outtakes. So I wanted to offer a definition of outtake from Merriam-Webster. It can be a passage outward, a flu event, or it can be something that's taken out, such as a take that's not used in an edited version of a film or a videotape. And so the following poems, I made a form out of this. It's called an outtake. And my definition of the form is the images, narrative, or other materials behind the poem or the final image. And these kind of remind me, Jessica, of your erasures. I do these to erase my poems. Those materials which did not make the printed version and which may be less formal, polished, directly narrative, contributing to a clear and direct discourse, but which may access a layer of the psyche or subconscious hinted at, but not explored in the original image with roots in deep image via the scavenger state. So I'm kind of, dorkily explaining this form before I launch into it. But essentially what I do is I take images from the documentary, the images that kind of didn't make sense, those mystery images, and each one became a title for a new poem. So I'll share one of those. It's called My Used Little Ovaries. My used little ovaries, still full, still braided rivers, those vessels of salt, blood, follicles afraid of the light. This oocyte opera wants to be a baby, wants to be a city of limbs. You say, silly city, silly permeable myometrium, silly reproductive system of infinite destruction, in which every month someone dies in this vermilion funeral. So the outtakes provide kind of narrative signposts through the book for one part of the book's themes, things taken out as the speaker's own body is cut open, literally by a surgeon's knife, metaphorically by a workplace under a government in late capitalism, where there exists no paid parental leave, or for many of us, even the right to unpaid leave, and our lives double or halve as we try to navigate those systems. So the next poem is called The Horse We Opened Together, and it's another central image that comes through. It's one of the outtakes. So outtake, The Horse We Opened Together. With our knives, with our blood swell, like plump cells, like a boy part surge. With our eggy mixers, with our barbed little vaginas, oh, dangerous as hell. We cut her throat to belly to rear. And her entrails whole and whorl, her little moony full solar system bloomed into our palms, a crust of pollen or comet dust, or what you find under the hood of a car, a 7-horsepower car, a herd of horses car. This horse, a mare, we stared down in a field until she loped to us, sweating, her will misshapen and smooth, her will gilled, scale crazy, glisten morning, like a trout. The next one is another outtake. It's The Roads I Drove. Pink punch drunk on the back of some four-wheeler with a boy I have loved since 5th grade. He's cutting down trees on the weekends and finishing school on Tuesday and Wednesday nights. He reaches up my shirt with his, he reaches up my shirt with his driving hand. The other is his waving hand, the one that could still be on the wheel. We veer into the river, we veer into the past. We veer into the ravine of sword ferns where our friend lost her life, where another broke her hymen. I want to kiss them, his diesel mouth, her throat of thorns. For him, I would swing an axe at this beautiful cedar. For me, he would cut down the sun. And then I'm going to read 2 more outtakes and then a new poem. It says, outtake, A City of Petals. This cemetery is a neighborhood of rhododendrons. A rhodie is a flower that looks like a tongue. A tongue tells a secret of hums and vibrations. A hummingbird hovers, proboscis inside one pushed open bloom. This headstone is covered in pollen, so we can't see who's buried here. Sweep off the stamens with a long-handled broom. And then this is rusted axle, the last outtake I'll read. It's rusted axle like a clicked tongue come unmoored, a cracked board. Unpeel me like a sticker from this page of my life, like an unfixed wife. This boat floating skyward, this boat floating darker into dark earth. This boat a garden of slick birth, and something unsaid, and something not wedded to anything worldly except dust. Its floating, torn form. Oh, flip this car over. Oh, see the fireweed growing through the floorboards. Oh, how it whitens with heady delight and needs wind. Oh, the seed. So that's all the outtakes that are on the slides. So if you're on the slides, they won't do you any good anymore. I'm going to close with a poem that isn't on those. It's a new piece, and it's part of a series of hexes that I'm working on. I've been writing, I used to write a lot of spells, and now I'm just writing hexes because I'm really angry. So hex. Hex as fairy tale. Once upon a time, I had this husband. Sure, he was a little boring occasionally, but he was good, and he was always there if needed. We had fun, lowercase, and we had an uppercase too. And the clouds kept rolling, and the grasses grew tall, taller seeds, and we walked through them, letting our hands. And then the men came and mowed them. And sometimes I wore dresses just brushing above my knees like sky, and other times he had a cavity or two. We were doing America and marriage, and sometimes I had thoughts in my mind by myself. Lately, I've been realizing our daughter, for we have one, golden-haired, a fair maiden, will have, like so many girls before her, the daddy issues. And wondering how they will manifest, I pay extra attention. Like in the tales, something happens on her 13th birthday. Not a needle, not a stone, not an apple, not a small home in the woods, but, and when I try to tell the story again and vary it, she says, we know. My own story, origin of the mother, involves an ocean, a tunnel, a gas station, midwife, and moon. Once upon the time, the story goes, a creek emptied itself into a sea, like a heart into another heart. Now that I have a villain, I think I really have a fairy tale. Something with kelp, and something with storm, and something with salt, and a long-armed man who walks out on us. Well, thank you for the complication. Here I thought all those years, string theory, light on garden, me needing and not getting so much quiet. The mower always going on the middle-class grasses, their short lives. Here all those years I spent thinking it was gonna be me. Thanks.
Thank you all so much for reading. These were amazing, amazing poems, really fabulous threads between them. After the reading, we always open to discussion. So audience, while you think of your questions, you're welcome to type them in or raise a hand. I'm going to throw one out that I'm really thinking about particularly after hearing Maya's reading and having it haunt me back through Jared's. And that is the relationship between haunting and obsession, and where you find them to be in dialogue or in discord with one another. Because as writers, some of us are told, oh, you're obsessed with this, so stop returning to this image. Others of us have been told, oh, you're obsessed with this, so keep returning to this image. And haunting asks for this kind of return. So I just wonder if you could talk about the relationship between haunting and obsession, if you see one. And you're all unmuted, so whoever wants to take it on first.
I can go first. Yeah, I think I'm certainly, I definitely see that connection between haunting and obsessed. For me, becoming a parent made the world an infinitely scarier and brighter place. And I find that that was something that haunted me. You know, just kind of bringing kids into the world, and suddenly, you know, all the stakes that surrounded that and all the ways in which things could go wrong. And I think that I kind of returned to that theme over and over again. There was a review of my book that came out last month in which I was called an anxious parent, which is, I was like, oh yeah, that's fair. But I do find that it, you know, in a sense, though, it also gave me, I think, in many ways, my subject. You know, the thing that holds this particular collection together. That, you know, the love and fear and love and loss, and how those two are always interrelated for so many of us. Yeah.
I can jump in. What if obsession is kind of like a I guess the analogy that I'm thinking of is like the stages of possession. You know, like when we think about spirit possession. I don't know if everybody watches like these like weird docudramas that I watch, like A Haunting, and the first thing is like the house is haunted, and then there's an infestation, and then that moves internally. And so like we see the world as we are, kind of thing. The obsession then works as possession. And so what comes out is possessed writing, which produces a feeling of haunting for the reader, perhaps. And so like if I stick with this metaphor, it makes a lot of sense, but then that's not to say that I'm not also haunted as a person by things that I see, but that's just it. Like maybe like the haunting is something that is interpretive, something that we understand as like either experiencing the art or the reading the poem ourselves, and then the obsession is that kind of like haunting in action, maybe kind of like the kinetic force of the potential energy of the haunting. Maybe, I don't know, but I see it as like I'm one of those people that writes deeply into the obsession, and I was trained under folks like Kimiko Han and Nicole Cooley, who would say things like, these are your life themes, return to them, because like your life is going to always orbit them, but think in terms of spiral and not circle. So when we come to these things, we come at different angles, come as we are now and not as we were then.
I feel like obsession always gets such a bad rap, right? Like it's pathologized, like it's seen as like tethered to some kind of mental illness. But I tell my students again and again to chase your obsessions. I think all of my work is pretty tethered to different forms of obsession, mostly historical obsessions. I think the haunting for me absolutely has to do with a type of obsessiveness although I feel like I'm trying to articulate the difference, which I think there is, between just a generalized obsession and the haunting, in which the haunting requires that there be a trace of something that cannot be recovered, or cannot be recovered from a different iteration it was before. Yeah, anyways, I'm just kind of brainstorming out loud, but I think for me, like that loss and that kind of like shadow work is really important for the haunting, which is like in the Venn diagram overlapping with obsession in my mind.
Jessica, I love that you were talking about the shadow work, and the shadow work being related to Jolie, and I have had an ongoing discussion about flood subjects too. So I'm kind of waving at Jolie over here. I'm excited that obsession is becoming cool in language. So when the youth say you're obsessed with something, or I'm obsessed with this, my daughter recently said I was obsessed with tea because I'm drinking tea all day long. She said, you're obsessed with tea. We're obsessed with tea. And I thought that was such a great way of turning the connotation of obsession. I think that poets are kind of winning right now, right? Because we do this. I think about Anastasia Renee recommending that people write obsession journals or keep an obsession journal. And it's this really wonderful prompt that we can, I'm sure we're all giving our students, but choose one obsession a week and just write down that one very small thing in your obsession journal. And on Sunday, do, all the rabbit holing about it. Find the etymology of the thing and find all the ways you can recycle that image, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have that obsession journal. Then that week, as you work to revise or generate, you just keep going back to the obsession journal full of the science and the etymology and the, the definitions. And you can every week have a new one, and you can choose a new obsession that you can return to ones you have naturally, but also to choose them. So I don't know. I love this topic. I don't think I'm adding anything to anyone else's sayings, but I'm really happy that we're talking about obsession.
But it's also the way, just tying like what Jessica just said and what you said, that when you dig so deep into a subject matter, there is the loss of the initial fervor, the initial love for it as you discover more. So even within, that kind of obsessive return, there is a haunting because you lose the initial, whatever brought you to it in the first place, whatever maybe naivete let you arrive there to tea. Just as you gain more knowledge. I don't know. That's really provocative and productive. Does anyone in the audience have a question before we let these brilliant folks go into the night? We're just going to sit and be haunted by them and by their words. Well, then I will just say thank you all so much for being here. And if you would like a bonus prompt, since we were talking about obsessions, go through your own writing and pick 3 to 5 words, images that you are obsessed with, and then write a poem, a prose piece, whatever it is, that digs much deeper into that obsession, into those 3 to 5 words. I've found that to be really generative. See how those words grow from obsessions to hauntings, or I don't know which way it goes. Maybe it goes back the other way. Maybe it goes both ways. But thank you so much, readers. Thank you so much, audience. Come back January 24th for more. Be well, be safe, be deeply full of empathy in our very haunted world that we are in. So much love.